Hello, all you hardcores. You know who it is. How you doing, Julian?
I'm all right, mate. How's your day been?
Fantastic. How's yours been?
It's been all right for a Monday. Apart from the odd little thing what keeps popping up on YouTube, certain annoying little characters, which no doubt we'll cover today. But my day's been all right, mate.
Yeah, brilliant. Uh, well, there's only one place to start, isn't there? Well, two actually, but we'll go straight in. Conor Benn situation. What's gone on there?
It's a funny one actually because there's two areas to explore from that. So first of all, I saw the fight. I wasn't planning on watching it, but I knew we were going to talk about it, and I think I've give Conor a little bit of stick on this channel, so I thought watch the fight and try and be objective as you watch it. So as I saw it, the first part is he showed some improvement with some of his kind of skills and his back foot boxing, if you like that expression. But then again, he was fighting somebody who was really a bit of a plodder and didn't have great skills. He was just a tough kid with a padded record, and kind of showed a little bit of boxing ability against a very low level of opponent who was ranked number 280 by BoxRec. So that's the positive out of the way. That's about the only positive I'm going to give it. But you and I have been chatting, as we always do, for some time, Russell, and there's an element of Conor Benn where they're really overhyping his power. They talk about him being this massive puncher, and Conor's always talking about, when I fight, you know what to expect. It usually ends in a knockout. But the reality, Russell, is Conor Benn's knocked out 14 opponents in 22 fights, and the level of opposition he's been beating, the level of opposition he's been fighting, either guys who could never fight to start with, survivors, non-punchers, or guys who are well past the sell-by date. He should have a much higher knockout percentage if he is in fact this killer that we're told that he is. And you and I, we're not haters, we're not trolls, we don't hide behind keyboards. We break things down, we deal with facts. Now, in his last 6 fights, this is the third time he's gone 10 rounds. So people are going to debate, has he lost his power because he's no longer taking what shouldn't have been taken, allegedly? Or is he never really this massive puncher that they've built him up to be? And I don't believe he is. If you look at the big punching welterweights in the division, you've got obviously Virgil Ortiz, 19-0, 19 KOs. I mean, did a real job on McKinson and wore him down. And you got Boots Ennis, who's 31 wins, 28 KOs. Those are devastating welterweight punchers, albeit Boots is more of a skillster. Where's Conor Benn in the equation of, what do you think in terms of him being this devastating knockout artist?
I see parallels between his career and his dad's. Right, where his dad were knocking everybody out, right? But Conor Benn's not knocked everybody out. 14 out 22s. Not like his dad. His dad were 22 and 22 at one point, wasn't he? But his dad came up against somebody decent and he wasn't knocking him out. Like Michael Watson and Chris Eubank, Sanderline Williams. I know that's going to get thrown into the mix, but that fight were like a Sanderline Williams one. Sometimes you just can't knock them out.
Exactly.
So maybe that guy could have been one of them, but where were the freakish power? He were going to kill people inside 2 rounds. One of them were going to kill us all in our beds. Is that scary? Where were that power? I didn't see it.
Well, the thing is, right, that what they're talking now is that, so they're talking nonsense by saying, this is what Conor said and various other people now. They're talking about this guy has got this Canelo-like chin, and I don't think we'll ever see him get stopped. So you and I know that's nonsense. So this kid who we beat, brave guy, he hasn't been in with anyone at all. Anyone at all. If you put him in, I don't care how durable he is, if you put him in with Virgil Ortiz, for example, he's going to get iced. He's going to get smashed to bits and he's going to get knocked out. All right? It's as simple as that. So let's not start talking about this guy as being the next, granite chin Jake LaMotta stroke Canelo Alvarez stroke Randall Tex Cobb, because ultimately then that means that 3 of his last 6 opponents have also had Canelo-like chins, doesn't it? Yeah. Anybody who Conor Benn's been unable to knock out, and that's 8 opponents from 22.
They're Iron Men, aren't they?
They're all Iron Men. They've all got massive levels of durability. So either that or Conor doesn't hit as hard as people think he does. And one thing you and I were chatting about 2-3 weeks ago, I said to you, didn't I? I said, I've been watching him on the bag and all these explosive Conor Ben smashes the pads, Conor Ben smashes the bag. And I said to you, didn't I? I says, there doesn't look to be that, and if it was ever there doesn't look to be that mind-numbing power as is on the pads with Tony Sims and is on the bag with when he's smashing that heavy bag. He didn't, and I said, I think it was about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we talked about it. It says it doesn't look to have that smashing power that, for example, when he was fighting Eubank Jr., and we all saw the videos of him hitting the bag 3-4 weeks before Eubank Jr., and he did look explosive then, albeit people still could go 10 rounds with him. So what sometimes fighters, I'll give you an example. So sometimes fighters like Mitch Blood Green, he went 10 rounds with Mike Tyson because he spoiled, he survived, he held, he did everything he could to go 10 rounds with Mike Tyson, and he took some big shots. But what we saw on Saturday night was Conor Ben was hitting this guy full flush all the way through, and he never moved him. And what was quite interesting afterwards as well was Conor did some impressive Spanish speaking, very, very fluent. And he was talking to his opponent and he says, well, what are you, like 154 pounds? Trying to build him up to be this massive light middleweight, stroke middleweight, super middleweight, even people have been saying. And Ben's opponent says, no, I can do 147. And Conor kind of awkwardly went a little bit quiet. So not only they're trying to say he's like the next Canelo, they're also saying this guy's a super middleweight. And you and I know it's rubbish. Clearly, it was a little bit bigger than Conor Ben, but he said himself, I can do 147. And the guy's done 147 before, but he's boxed at a very, very low level. Hence, we'll keep repeating, 208 by a box rec. So Conor Ben is not this devastating puncher at welterweight. He's not Thomas Hearns, he's not Pepino Cuevas, and he's not even Boots Ennis or Virgil Ortiz. But this is the narrative. This is the narrative. And so what we've got is we've got Eddie Hearn then. And remember, I said to you on Sunday morning, I says, you watch them start to go cold on this Eubank fight. They'll stick the chest out and they'll still talk about the Eubank fight. But I said to you, buddy, didn't I? Goes, you watch now, they've seen him against a light middleweight, stroke welterweight, and they've seen these shots just bounce off his chin. And all of a sudden, you got Eubank, who's a big middleweight. He boxed at super middleweight before. Yes, he got knocked out by Liam Smith, but I think that 157 really killed him. But you start to think, don't you? Am I this puncher that the narrative and that they're portraying me to be? And I think the answer is no. And even the commentary said the same thing on Saturday night. The commentators were saying what they need to be thinking. And they say this halfway through the fight. That says it was the guy who was in the contender whose name escapes me. And he says what they need to start.
Antonio Tarver.
No, the DAZN commentator. It was I'm trying to think of the name. It was on the contender. I forget his name. I think he won it. And
Sergio or something, is it?
Yes, Sergio. He's a nice guy. I like him.
The snake, wasn't he?
That's it. Well, he said halfway through the fight, and he repeated it a couple of times. He says, "If you Conor Ben now,
Sergio Moira."
That's it. That's the one. He says, "Listen, if you Conor Ben and you Conor Ben's team now, and you're watching the shots bounce off this guy's head, you really need to start be thinking: do we even want to fight at 154 pound? Never mind 160 pound. Do I really want to be fighting at 154 pound?" And of course, true to form, because even though we're trolls and we're haters, we read this stuff, we read them like books. All of a sudden, IFL a few hours ago saying, I could even do 147, I might even campaign at 147, blah, blah, blah. And I just thought, you watch, right? What's going to happen now, Russell?
He's just going to sell his name, innit, for a biggest bidder, innit? That's all he's doing, innit?
Yeah. And they're going to go cold on this Eubank fight now, and they'll blame Eubank. They'll say it's Eubank's not got back to us, they've not signed the contract. But if you're handling Conor Ben now, you really need to be thinking, you know what? He's not got rid of this guy. He's not got rid of 3 out of his last 6 opponents. These opponents, by the way, like Formella and these guys, they're like 33, 34-year-old guys. They're old guys who, there's no danger, there's no jeopardy in those fights, and he's not getting rid of those guys. And we're expected to believe he's going to start knocking out the Golovkins and the Eubank Juniors of this world, and he's not even getting rid of guys of that level.
How's he been matched, Conor Ben?
Well, again, so I did a little bit of. People must think I'm obsessing Conor Ben, but it's nothing to do with that. It's to do with getting to the truth, isn't it? And we always say this, don't we? You can't dispute data. So today, I did a little bit of digging on Conor Ben's opposition and their lack of firepower. I did that because, you know, I mentioned this before about Campbell Hatton, and I've said, generally when you're a coach or when you're managers, you know if your guy has got a problem in the chin area. You just know, you fight it backwards. I knew, you know, fighters I've worked with, some of them struggled with sharp southpaw, some of them struggled with certain styles. So if you could, you'd avoid those type of styles, certainly when fighters are coming through the ranks. Now, I've said to you about Campbell Hatton, they absolutely know he won't have the whiskers. He won't have a great chin. So they've matched him against non-punchers. And I said exactly the same to you about Conor Ben, and you said it as well. He hasn't fought anybody with any pop. So I did some digging today, and I collated. It took 3 minutes, by the way, if people think I've got too much time on my hands. A bit of a quick lunch break. And I looked at his 22 opponents, and the average KO percentage of Conor Ben's 22 opponents, unsurprisingly, is 24%. And if you drill even further into the 4 or 5 fights previous to this, you got, I'll get the names wrong, you got one guy who hadn't scored a KO in 7 years, you got another guy who'd scored 1 KO in 7 years, another guy who'd scored 3 KOs in 5 years against guys with losing records, and another guy who'd scored 1 KO in 6 years or something like that. What I'm saying, Russell, and what we've been talking about, there's a history.
Oh.
There's a history. There's no jeopardy in the fights that Conor Ben's been having. And some of these kids are still managing to go with him 10 rounds. So they've got no, you think about that. The guys I've just listed, his last 5 opponents before this guy on Saturday, have had 0 pop in the shots. They haven't been stopping people for 7 years, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
So if no jeopardy in these guys, and Conor Ben still can't get rid of 3 of the 6, he's either a lousy finisher or this puncher, this brutal KO puncher that Eddie Hearn says Eubank Jr. won't be able to live with his power, when we've just seen effectively a journeyman with a padded record live with his power. It's not there, mate. It's a narrative. They're lying to people, they're kidding people, and it's all about name calling, the big names out there. They've got no intention of fighting the big guns at welterweight. If he does end up fighting at 147, you watch them try and engineer some kind of IBO belt or some kind of interim belt or some deal they'll do with a sanctioning body.
8 belt.
Yeah, they'll free up a belt for Conor. That's what they're going to do. Because what they're really going to be thinking very carefully about now, they won't say this publicly, is this Eubank Jr. fight. That's if he can even get a license in the UK. They'll be really thinking about that now, thinking maybe it's not such a good idea. Because what we do know about Conor Ben's small, isn't he?
Yeah.
His stature's small. All right, we've got the neck's thickened up and a little, he's got some muscle on him now, which some of it looks to have disappeared a little bit. But Conor Ben is of small stature. So you start to think about that then. We've all seen the face-off, him and Eubank, haven't we? The picture from last year. There's a size difference between those 2 guys. There's 2 size differences. And if he has got overrated power, which I believe he has, then that power certainly isn't going to move a middleweight and a super middleweight. So
I think it'd be too wily for him, Eubank.
Yeah, he's just, the thing is with Ben is he's quite predictable. His dad used to do the same thing. They have that wide stance and the bend from the waist and they drop the hands down, don't they? And the swing over the top. He's very, very similar to his father's DNA and style. In some areas, he's a little bit more polished, but in some areas, he's very similar to his dad. Now, his dad wasn't hard to tag, was he?
No.
Nigel wasn't hard to tag, and Nigel didn't have the greatest chin either. So I know Eubank's been stopped once, but Eubank Jr. up until that last fight, the fight before with Smith, looked to have his father's DNA, didn't he?
Yeah.
And I'd say that Conor Ben's probably got some of Nigel's DNA. For anybody who thinks I'm hating on Nigel, yep, he survived against McClellan, but Nigel Ben didn't have an iron chin. He had he could be.
Carl Thompson stopped Eubank twice, though, didn't he?
I think it was the size, though. He didn't shift him, did he, as such?
Yeah.
But Eubank, I always like to judge a fighter throughout his best years and and his best weight. And Eubank at super middleweight, he could take a shot. And I think Eubank Jr.'s got a reasonable chin. All right, he got stopped, it happens. But I think there's got problems with the whiskers with Conor Benn. And if there isn't problem with the whiskers, why has his opponent's got a 24% knockout percentage? There's a consistency all through the matchmaking. And anyone will tell you that matchmaking is an art. Developing fighters is an art. But when you have a fighter who you know has got certain limitations, then you have to be very, very careful how you match them. So Conor Benn has been matching non-punchers or people who have some KOs on their ledger. They haven't been knocking anybody out for 4, 5, 6 years. So am I hating or am I speaking facts? Well, have a look at his opposition, have a look at their records and who they beat and when, and have a look at when they stop people. And you find out there's a real formula to Conor Benn's opposition, and there's going to be a formula going forward.
It's going to be hard to match him now, isn't it? Because it's going to be, they're going to have their head in their hands if it's like not a big fight. So they're just going to hang on for a big fight, aren't they? Keep his name out there, good or bad. He's going to have to play villain, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. But the one thing we did see was when he came out at the weekend. I say I watched it, hypocrite, whatever. I watched it when he came out at the weekend. There wasn't a lot of noise, was there? So Conor's not quite the stateside star that maybe they thought it was. You might get 5 or 6 people asking for an autograph. People hang around boxing gyms, will have an autograph with anybody. But in the UK, I think there's a lot of love for Conor. I've said that before. There's a lot of love and a lot of hate for Conor. You should never hate anybody, but there's a lot of dislike for Conor. But there's a lot of love for Conor in the UK. I said to you before, he gets mobbed at these big shows. But ultimately, in the States, he's nobody. He's nowhere. He's not a name.
Yeah.
People in the States will vaguely remember his dad because, he did a good number on Barclay and DeWitt. But, generally, you remember this, Russell. There was always this view that the Benns, the Eubanks, the Watsons kind of stayed at home and they stayed in the UK. And the James Toney, Roy Jones, and Michael Nuns would have just trounced these guys.
They passed that WBO belts about, didn't they?
Yeah, so Nigel Benn had the great win against McClellan, but other than that, really, if you look at the British quartet, so if you look at Steve Collins,
done Iron Barclay though, didn't
he did Iron Barclay, and that's what I'm saying. That was a good win over Barclay.
McClellan.
He caught McClellan. He caught him early, but I don't know. I don't know. I think, as I'm saying, as a whole, if you look at, Michael Watson, he got absolutely mullered by McCallum, didn't he? I'm talking about guys who we had who were good fighters, like I said, WBO champions. You got Watson, who got absolutely just destroyed by Mike McCallum. You got Nigel had some good...
Graham got robbed against Mike McCallum. He had a point took off him, didn't he? And he lost by half a point or something, didn't he?
I always want to watch that fight again because I've heard that before that I was unlucky, and when I watched it at the time, I don't remember him being robbed, but I remember he did get the point taken off him. I remember you forget, don't you? Because I remember the fights with Sambo Kalambe.
And he was a world champion as well.
Good fighter was Sambo Kalambe. But I don't know. There was something about that. The British fighters, like Eubank. If you're harsh and you look at Chris Eubank Jr. Senior, look at Chris Eubank Senior. Who was his best win? It was probably Nigel Benn, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It probably was Ben who was his best win. And I know I've gone off track there, but that's what I'm saying. So there's an element of history repeating itself, isn't there? Where they're saying you got Eubank Jr., you got Liam Smith, Conor Benn's calling him out. There's that element of what happened. It's good matchmaking. It's good sense. It's good business sense. But you have an element of Conor Benn was never going to mention.
Kell Brook into it mix.
That's what I'm saying. You get all these fighters who were kind of either still decent or but not quite what they were. And this is what happened. If you remember Steve Collins. So Steve Collins had the wins over Eubank. But Collins had been trounced a couple of times, hadn't he? He'd been beat by McCallum. He'd been beat by, I think it was Reggie Johnson. So he'd been well beat by the decent Americans. And then they came over here, and as you said, they kept sharing the WBO belt, really, didn't they? Without, I think Nigel Benn, actually, the irony, as you've said, Nigel Benn was the one who actually did fight those top American fighters. Although they definitely avoided the Tonys and the Nuns and the Roy Joneses, didn't they?
Crawford Ashley didn't avoid them.
Crawford Ashley didn't at all. You know something, I always think about, I've met Crawford several times, and I always think about how Crawford Ashley got down to 12 stone when he fought Michael Nunn. How did that man get down to 12 stone?
6'3".
Unbelievably. Shoulders like that. Absolute giant of a light heavyweight, and they boiled him down, didn't they, for Michael Nunn? I mean, no wonder Michael Nunn broke his rib and, you know, devastated him with body shots. He got nothing in him at all, had he?
No.
He could punch, could Crawford Ashley. Wow.
Massive puncher. That's Clinton.
I said to you, I'll never forget this. You know, you have certain memories in boxing as a coach, and he was probably a little bit past his best, was Crawford. And I was training a kid, good friend of mine called Mally McIver, decent lightweight. And we were in the same changing rooms as Crawford Ashley. It was in Hull, and Crawford Ashley was fighting some guy. It was a 4-rounder, 6-rounder, you know, keeping trim or keeping shape kind of fight. And it was a bit heavy, was Crawford. I think he looked to be about a cruiserweight. It was a non-title fight. And he was on the pads at the side of me and Mally. And me and Mally were just like, you know, when you're looking at someone, and he was smashing the pads, was Crawford. And I was like, wow, just unbelievably hard puncher. I think the only other fighter I've seen with that kind of power was when I saw Herbie Hyde warming up on the pads in a prize fighter with Graham Everett. I was in the same changing rooms as him, and Herbie Hyde could crack as well. That was, you know, when you literally sat because York Hall, they've got tiny little dressing rooms. When you sat 3 feet away from a guy like Herbie Hyde hitting pads, you wouldn't want him hitting you on the chin, mate.
Yeah, Herbie Hyde could crack. We were a lunatic, wasn't he?
It was crackers, and he didn't have a great chin, did he? But he really could punch, the dancing destroyer. And it makes you, I know we always go off tack. It's a good thing to do that, but it gives you an appreciation of pro fighters, doesn't it?
2-time heavyweight champion at Wales, Herbie Hyde.
Yeah, WBO, but he certainly was. And he beat Michael Bent, didn't he, the first time around? And I think from memory, he beat Tony Tucker the second time around. I think Tucker's a bit shot, but he got some quick hands, hadn't he, for you know, a heavyweight, even though it was a small heavyweight.
Yeah. Hey, I'll tell you a story about big punchers. Ula Clementson, Clinton, when he was a massive puncher, on 46,
massive puncher,
46 wins, about 36, 37 knockouts or something. Anyway, Clinton went over to spar him, and he were putting him through ropes and that. And after he put this guy down, flattened him, he leaned over at ropes and he went, "You Woods next in here." Clinton held his own and then actually beat him. Not long after. Beat him for European. Clinton defended European title against him.
I might be wrong here, but why do I think Ole Clemenson beat Crawford Ashley?
Well, when this point I'm making is when you step up someday, you can all be knocking people out all the time, like he was knocking people out in there. But when Clinton got in there, he didn't do that to Clinton for all his bravado. Even though he were an Iceman, when you step up, you know, you don't knock.
Absolutely, and what you've just said there is correct, because there's always 3 things that happen when you step up, what you're not used to happening, and you better be able to deal with it and prepare it. So there's 3 things that's going to happen to Conor Benn when he steps up. The first thing that happens is you hit a guy full on and he doesn't go anywhere. So he's already experienced that. The second thing is you throw a massive shot at a guy and he just slips out of the way of the shot. Facial expression never changes. And the third thing that can happen is he'll step out of the way of the shot, pop, and he'll counter you. And that's when you know you elevate in quality. There's a guy who can take his shot out there. There's a guy who can defend your shot. But the guy who's going to beat you He's the guy who counters the shot. He takes it, he defends it, he counters it. And that's what we're talking about matchmaking for Conor Benn. Those are the things that he's going to have to be able to deal with, because what you've just said there is right. Good fighters will just take it and they'll come back at you. They'll take it and they'll come back at you. They'll make you miss, they'll make you tired. And all I saw was really Conor Benn just unloading his shots and the guy taking it. And he came back with a couple of swipes, but it definitely wasn't as close as the.
Well, you see, that's the art of being a good matchmaker, you see, because the matchmakers will know they'll have to match guy. You can't just match going on BoxRec. That's only half at battle. Sometimes you'll have to watch them. And Conor Benn will have people making massive decisions on who he fights. There'll be 6 or 7, 8 people having input on that. And they've got to get it right. So if they can get somebody with a padded record who's got some KOs and no losses or hardly losses, it looks good, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? But when you scratch the surface, he's basically fighting waste men, isn't he?
Yeah, which is exactly what, I mean, he's a different level, he's a novice, but we've seen this with Campbell Hatton. Campbell Hatton's last opponent, I said to you, they're going to have to find someone on paper who's got a half-decent record, but he'll have zero pop. He'll have like no pop whatsoever.
But you know, Campbell Hatton, I think public might warm to him in end because
nice kid.
He's not going around giving it the big one like Conor Benn is. He's getting his head down. It's not his fault he's in that situation. Maybe it might have been better for him to be away from lights and get 10 wins on board. But now he's there now, isn't he? 12-0, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I always, I mean, COVID happened, I know that, and a few amateurs turned pro, but each to his own. You could say that you can say it's a good thing that he's being propelled where he is, but you can also say it's going to be a hard thing as well because he's not able to learn his trade and develop away from the spotlight.
He's going to have another 10, 13 fights. He'll be 25-0 before he's ready for anything.
Yeah, I think someone like Campbell Hatton, they should have given him 2 or 3 more years in the amateurs, open class, put him through to the open class, put him in the senior elites, and see how he does and give him that little bit more school in the amateurs, and then maybe turn him pro under the radar a little bit. But everything's now, well, in fact, to be honest, Russell, we've seen them kind of like drop down a level, haven't we? Because he was very high up the bill, wasn't he, when he first turned over? And they got the blue moon and the whole thing. It's just they've subdued it.
If this father's reined it in, good, because it should be. He's very, very, very limited, and they should rein it in a little bit and ask him if he really wants to do it, because it's a long, long project for him, isn't it? If he's going to do anything, or are they just going to try and nick a few quid?
He's a nice kid, but he's a. I've said this to you before, and I only wish him luck because he's a lovely lad. You can see that, but he's a bad knockout waiting to happen, and that's why like we talked about Conor Benn. That's what we're saying. I think it's good for people to talk about this and to hear this, because matchmaking, as you've said, is an absolute art. Matchmakers get absolutely scolded when they get it wrong, don't they? Because you will say, it's like
fucking do.
When you're an amateur, who
do you think the parents blame? They'll go straight to manager, and then manager will say it's matchmaker.
I've had a couple of bollockings off matchmakers when I had one kid in particular who was an explosive puncher, and he fought some kid on a show in Leeds, and I was basically told, your lad, just do what you need to do, but don't take him out. And I'm not into all this carry job, and I just says do what you need to do. And the fighter I was with, he took this guy out in 2 rounds and brutalized him, and I got absolutely just ripped for that one. It's like, you don't get kids coming over and do this and do that. I said it was a 4-rounder and blah blah blah. This kid got hurt. He got his tooth knocked out by my fighter. And so there's that side of matchmaking where there's certain conversations that happen in boxing. People hate me saying this, but they do. We all know what a carry is.
Well, they blame training, don't they? Matchmaker will just tell parents, well, training were all right with it, and then he'll be able
to... Yeah. And I had the same kid I'm talking about now. I got offered a fight for him once, and I said, absolutely not. I looked at the kid he was supposed to be fighting. He'd got a losing record. He'd had 5 fights, won 2, lost 3. And he was obviously clearly somebody who hadn't applied himself, because I looked at it, he'd won like 7 or 8 Welsh national titles. And my lad was a novice, and I said, was a good probe. It was novice. And I said, nah, we don't want that one. So what you've just said is right. You got the trainer, you got the matchmaker, you got all these conversations, what happened. And Conor Benn, they're going to have to be really, really careful how they match him. They're going to have to be so careful how they match him, because I'm telling you, I'm not telling you, I'm not teaching you how to suck eggs, but I'm saying he doesn't have a great chin. They know that. And his power is slightly overrated. So there's been no jeopardy in any fight that Conor Benn's had right now, has there? There's not been. I mean, the Payne fight was like, Christ, that wasn't supposed to happen. There's been no jeopardy in Conor Benn's opposition because none of them's had any power. And the ones who could fight, the Chris Algiers of this world, they could fight 5 years ago. They can't fight anymore. So there's no jeopardy. And a couple of times I've almost got it wrong. So what do you do with him now? So if you're looking after Conor Benn, Russell, what would you do with him now?
Right, I'll just tell him to deal with board things. So deal with that first, then we'll clean your image up. You can go around all schools and that and say, just say no, like Zamo.
Yeah. I think it's going to be tough matching him. It's going to be tough matching him.
And then what I'd do to get public back on his side, I say, right, you're going to go British route here, welterweight British route.
Yeah. Esserman, McKinson,
Ponga,
whoever, all these guys. Yeah.
Josh Kelly.
Yep. Let's go the domestic route and let's see how you get on, because this is the problem, isn't it? Is you engineer people into these positions, but then at some point.
Well, he's calling Crawford out on Twitter tonight. Have you seen it?
I mean, I could call Crawford out. I'm not going to get the fight, am I? Do you know what I mean? It's ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, you got Terence Crawford, who we don't even need to say how much better he is than Conor Benn, because you can't even compare them. But if I were Conor Benn,
did you see it?
I saw someone sent me a screenshot.
Yeah, you sent me it.
Oh, with me, yeah, he's calling him out, but I don't read it. I just see the headline. But what Conor Benn could actually do is under the radar. He should be asking guys like Crawford if he can get some rounds with them. Sparring. Get some sparring with these guys, because that'd do him the world of good. But it'd also show him at what that level that they're at. Because this is the problem we've got with Matchroom. They're telling us he's this massive puncher and he's going to do this and he's going to do that. And it's not the truth, is it? It's not the truth. Or they're absolutely delusional. It's one or the other. But it's so funny, wasn't it? The guy goes the distance and he's obviously got Canelo's chin. Well, what about Formella? Who was the other guy who went the distance with him about 5-6 fights ago? Have they got these granite chins as well?
Yeah. Could be worse, though. They could be on a Dennis ticket deal at Pine Grove. How are you doing, Dennis? I know you're listening. Pop, pop, bang.
Right, Dennis.
Yeah, this Conor Benn thing, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's like they stuck two fingers up and said, we're doing what we want. Do you think?
Well, I don't know if you want to talk about on this one or the second part, but the worst PR disaster that could have come out of this was Frank Smith's interview that I did on.
Oh, Sideshow Frank.
Sideshow Frank, Igor. So this.
Let me just get this statistic out before we start. In the last 8 weeks, Sideshow Frank, aka Spotty Frank Eubank, has got more watch time hours across social media than he did in the whole of 2022. He was like a mouse. All of a sudden, what's happened is like this OG, isn't it, from Essex?
He's found some spirit and some
balls. This guy's got balls. He's already had it with Eddie Hearn on cobbles. Yeah,
he definitely doesn't have balls, does he? He's just got what they call it. I said to you before, didn't I? They hang around with boxers. They hang around the sport long enough. They start to get this little bit of an edge to them. But what Frank, anybody who's not seen this on Boxing King Media, and I was sent it by some mates in that group I'm in tonight, is nothing short of disgraceful what he said. He was talking about, this was before Conor Benn fought, it was Saturday night, and he was talking about the critics of Conor Benn who says he hasn't gone down the correct process, and he called out Carl Froch, Gareth A. Davis, and Frank Smith has effectively said people don't understand this stuff. They shouldn't be allowed to comment on it because they don't understand this stuff. I mean, he says you've got people like builders, and then he started stuttering and getting really anxious, and he's effectively.
What's happened there? I think it's froze. Well, we've lost Julian for a moment there. Basically, Spotty Frank, Sideshow Frank. You're losing plot. That's what's happening there, isn't it, with him? He's losing the plot big time. He's gone all OG, hasn't he? Do you know what I mean? He's gone all OG. Oh, we've lost Julian. He'll be back in a second. He'll dive back in. Right, if you're done, I'll tell you what, we'll go to part 2. Pop, pop, bang. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment.